course, especially at the master's level, trying to get its future business leaders to acknowledge this and to hopefully cooperate more. Very literally, stop killing the planet in order to make a profit. You could almost put that on the tagline as why we're offering this course. And so everyone's recognizing that that is true. And this is where I would also say, and forgive me for these soapboxes here, but we, the church, needs to preach about this. We often talk about loving your neighbor in the sense of being forgiving, cross racial lines and things like that. And that's all well and good. Absolutely, we should do that. Talk about loving your neighbor in the context of marriage, context of parenting, context of workplace relations in general. We often don't address this. It's almost as if we've forgotten, or maybe we don't know, that there's a lot of potential greed and corruption of the soul that can happen simply by being in business and having to, and unfortunately making the wrong choices in these business relationships. We need to encourage, we need our pastors, we need our people to preach on fairness, on counteracting greed in the workplace, especially to the business leaders in our church. But nevertheless, prisoner's dilemma of business. So where does regulation, like, oh, now that you're getting out your soapboxes, whatever, where does regulation fit in this? Well, government regulations are often trying to force businesses to cooperate, to pay those costs early on, if you will, especially in terms of quality and safety, but even in terms of the externalities, the benefits to society or the harms to society, to clean up the emissions that they put out into the air. So oftentimes government is trying to get the businesses to do these cooperative things, to cooperate and give the benefits, share the benefits, if you will, in those relationships. So you have this regulation then as an enforcement of cooperation. And so that's why regulation is tricky. That's why even when you're listening to politicians, especially when they're on the campaign trail talking about, we got to cut back the regulations. Well, what regulations are you talking about? Because regulation is competition in the sense of government investing is one thing. Regulations as subsidy in the sense of helping out the free market, helping out those entrepreneurs to make sure that they make a profit so that we can get the jobs and the stuff that they would produce. Or regulation as forcing them to cooperate. All of these are very different, may even be desirable in certain cases and undesirable in certain others. We have to understand what they are so we can understand what we want out of society. Let me talk about some truisms. Some things that political scientists have observed over time about how business groups, business interest groups, relate to government. One thing we've seen is that business tends to favor Republicans. Business groups tend to favor Republicans. Why? Because Republicans, or at least the Republican Party, has historically been, since that time of John Maynard Keynes, against the idea of the government as a competitor of business. They do not favor government investment in business. They favor leaving that to private individuals and the private marketplace, the relationship between suppliers and buyers. However, and on the other side, Democrats have tended to side with labor, consumers, and society in forcing businesses to pay those costs to cooperate. And so those two emphases, move businesses more in favor of the Republican Party on average. And so when you talk about campaign contributions, for example, Republicans have held a historic advantage in receiving campaign contributions from business groups. However, second point, business groups will engage any political official, which is to say both parties get business money. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Both parties get business money. Why? Not because both parties are beholden to business. They are in the sense that they want to encourage jobs and more stuff. But it's because businesses will go to whoever holds the controls over power, over government power. Meaning, if I want a subsidy, if I want a government contract as a business, I don't have the liberty of only going to the Republicans if the Democrats are in charge. I'll go to whoever I need to as a business person in order to get the things that I want out of government. Okay? So yes, there is a favoring of Republicans, but they'll go to anybody. All right? And so let's ask it from the other side. How does government then relate, or what have we observed about how government relates to business? Especially in light of this. We know that government policy has to favor public policy, meaning we know that politicians are elected by the people, and people want certain things out of government, and successful politicians are going to be good at giving the people what they want. So how in the world do those politicians give the people what they want and then give businesses what they want, especially in the instances where those businesses want things that are not super beneficial or not perfectly cooperative with what the public wants? All right? So what I ask here. And we've seen some of this already. So as I just covered, we talked about this last week, for that matter, we talked about Congress. Politicians are very good at using their speeches and their final roll call votes in Congress to make sure that those line up with what their constituency wants. They're going to speak and they're going to vote the way their constituency wants. So then how do they give to interest groups what they want? Well, they can move things along. The appropriately timed campaign contribution can help move things along for businesses. And moving things along, again, that's not the final vote. That's not the floor vote. That's just moving things along. Okay? So politicians can give to interest groups in that way, move things along. And then they can use other ways to give businesses what they want, ways that cannot be directly traced back to the politician. And we saw this already when we talked about iron triangles with the bureaucracy. One absolutely critical way that politicians can give to interest groups what they want is let the bureaucracy make the decisions to actually give it to them, to the interest groups. So instead of me and my floor vote, which is recorded by the clerk of the House and public for everyone to see, oftentimes even broadcast on C-SPAN as I make the vote. So instead of using that, instead of using my campaign speeches to talk about all these things that I did for that business in my district, I can instead push that whole decision off to the bureaucracy and say, executive branch, here's your marching orders, bureaucratic agency, give that contract to that company. Or put forth that subsidy. Or better yet, regulations. Regulate that industry. So here, and think about it, when you talk about regulations as a subsidy, a Democrat whose audience might think of regulations as enforcing cooperation can use the same word and use it to give a subsidy to a business. Something that their public, their constituency would not want. Same word. But the audience wouldn't know the difference. And so this is why this iron triangle has been such an important discovery on the part of political scientists, and something that drives them crazy in the sense it's something they wish didn't happen but nevertheless does. Because it's the way. It's, I'd argue, one of the number one ways. The number one way. The other two are through omnibus bills and through tax legislation, the tax code. But nevertheless, it's there. My wife's going to kill me for not taking her call. But I want to finish this video, and then I will take my wife's call. So, getting to the end. The utility of a Christian business. All right? So this is my last little soapbox of this lecture. I believe that God has called many of us, and may be calling many of you, to launch your own business, to start your own enterprise. And why? I've actually talked about it much during this lecture already. First, you can meet needs through a Christian business. We'll get into that more. You can use it to fund the gospel. You can use it for discipleship. You can use it to make a profit. Let's get to the meeting needs first. Remember, we talked about business businesses produce goods and services, and they produce jobs. Well, if you are the business leader and you are a person would have some means, or at least the expertise to launch a business, you can be the one that provides those goods and those services and those jobs, especially the good paying jobs, to those who need them. And so launching a business is a way that you can meet society's needs by providing the stuff that society needs and providing the jobs that people need. Also, you can fund the gospel. As we talked about, next slide. As we talked about, one of the uses of the profit and paychecks for everybody, not just businesses, is charity and philanthropy. Meaning the support of our churches comes from people who have the resources. Think about the upper room. Jesus told his disciples, sent them into town, said, follow this man with a donkey. He will, no, that was a donkey to get the coat. Follow this man that you'll find, whatever, I can't remember all the circumstances, but he will lead you to a large upper room that is fully furnished. Somebody had to have the money, the resources. Someone needed to have made sufficient profit or paycheck to afford to have that extra upper room fully furnished and ready for the Passover. We need those with resources to fund the gospel. You might be that one. Also, we talked about discipleship. Sorry, I keep forgetting to put that up there. And I'm just going to use an anecdote on this one. We know that the commercial, if you're around long enough, you've heard that, you remember the commercial, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. So someone would say, well, E.F. Hutton says, and then everyone in the room would get quiet and turn their attention. People listen to business leaders. How revered is Steve Jobs, or was Steve Jobs, in our society? Not because the great thing that he did, he provided us stuff that we didn't even know we wanted until we had it. And you could argue about the jobs, a significant number of jobs, whatever, changed life. But notice how people were willing to listen to him, to follow him. Warren Buffett has a cadre of maybe even worshipers because of his business success. Could not someone use that same type of success to turn that notoriety into a discipleship opportunity? Who wouldn't listen to someone who's achieved that kind of level? You could use that for the gospel. And then, of course, lastly, making a profit. I'm going to leave on this point. You remember back when we were talking about the economy, we talked about the provision and the spectrum of provision from poverty to prosperity. And we actually did this in class, but I'm going to make the point again here. Workers will make a certain amount, all right? So they won't be impoverished. That's why we need jobs, because we don't want to be impoverished. But they'll make a certain amount. Businesses on average, and you got to think about it in this way. What are the first thing that an entrepreneur does? He takes his own brawn, brain, and experience, but then he brings in the brawn, brains, and experience of other people. So he multiplies his efforts through the efforts of other people. So businesses on average, just a rough average for the sake of example, can earn over 1,000 times the amount that the worker earns on a paycheck. Think about that. Take your paycheck, multiply it by 1,000. Put 3 more zeros on the end of that paycheck. That's what you can produce through an enterprise. And I'm going to put it here because we in the church often act like this isn't true. But it's true. Ecclesiastes 2:24-26. There is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This is the New American Standard Version. This also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. In chapter 3, verse 13, it's going to say it is the gift of God. If God gives you the acumen and the wherewithal to see the opportunity to launch a business, be successful in that business, He is blessing you to have the results thereof. We are often against money because we're so scared of the love of money, and we should be. But that shouldn't preclude us or prohibit us from making the money for our own provision, for discipleship, for funding the gospel, and for meeting needs in society. I believe God has many of you to do that very thing for our sake.